If there's one thing we know about the DLCs in the Souls games, it's this. The bosses are gonna throw you around like the little ragdoll you are, and Miyazaki is gonna come flying through your TV screaming, "Get good." That's why today I want to talk about the best DLC boss in each Souls game besides Demon Souls and Elden Ring. Please just give us the DLC already, it's been almost a year. Starting with Dark Souls, let's begin with the runner-up. We have Manus, Father of the Abyss. Manus is probably my second favorite fight in this entire game, and man is he difficult. The only reason he doesn't get the top spot for me is because he's so gigantic, it was hard for me to see what was going on half the time, and before I knew it, I was getting comboed into oblivion. I love the creativity of this fight and his unique movesets. I ranked him as the hardest boss in Dark Souls 1, and I think that stands after me trying him again. And even though some of his attacks make me want to throw my controller on the ground, slowly realize what I've done and pick up the piece of my controller as well as my broken heart, rush out the room but accidentally slam the door a little bit too hard and it hits the back of my heel a tiny bit, have that intense moment where you know the pain is coming but it hasn't hit yet, cry a little bit and say it was allergies, come back and try him again until I beat him and start saying "get good" to the random kids who are struggling, I still think he's a great final boss for the DLC. And while he wasn't necessarily my favorite, he still holds a special place in my heart. And by the way, if you need a reminder not to give up, Skeleton, I just restocked my shirts. I hand make each of these with my friend and they're really good quality if you want to check them out, link in the pinned comment. But now let's move on to the real best boss in the Dark Souls DLC, Artorias. This is the boss I'd rank second in difficulty because he won't get the hell away from you when you're trying to heal. Artorias is probably the most fun I had fighting a boss in this game because it feels pretty balanced overall but still has a good challenge. His attacks are super quick and I don't know if it's just me, but sometimes they feel like they have this weird delay that always ends up catching me. And good luck trying to get more than one hit in at a time with this guy. If you're as greedy as I am, I wish you and your 500 attempts good luck because you're gonna need it. Once you get his moveset down, this fight is super satisfying and feels pretty fulfilling once you finally beat him. I think he's a perfect final boss for this game overall, gameplay and lore wise, so I don't think many people are gonna disagree with this decision. Anyway, next up we have Dark Souls 2. I've been going back and forth between two choices here, but I think I'm gonna give the honorable mention to the Gang Squad. No, I'm just kidding. My honorable mention goes to the Fume Knight. Another runner-up that made the top spot as the hardest boss in the Souls games, the Fume Knight was such a pleasant surprise to me in my first playthrough. Really the only reason he didn't get the top spot is the mechanic where he'll heal if you don't destroy the statues, which is a huge pain if you didn't know to do that, and his hitboxes are also just heinous. But this could also be because I wasn't aware adaptability existed until I had already beaten the game. The Fume Knight is such a cool boss and a really fun fight with his crazy combos and second phase. He's considered one of the hardest in the series for a good reason, and I had a great time trying him over and over. But as I've said, I think one other boss slightly gets the edge over the Fume Knight, and that boss is Sir Alone. He just has a lot less bullshit. Okay, well, apparently I can't say any bad words anymore or else I get demonetized, so let's just say he has a lot less mechanics that make you want to bash your head against the wall. Putting aside the fact that this boss run makes me want to throw up in my mouth a little bit, Sir Alone is one of the coolest battles this game has to offer and is such a fun fight. I actually tend to have an easier time with Sir Alone than the Fume Knight, despite him being much quicker, and no, I don't use a Great Shield for him. That's really the only bad thing about the boss itself. If you use a Great Shield against him, he's cake. But his moveset is really fun to learn, and it feels like one of the great boss fights you've been building up throughout the game. Thank you, sir. Moving on to Bloodborne, boy am I gonna get slaughtered in the comments for this one. Despite Ludwig being an awesome fight aesthetically and lore-wise, I think my favorite has to be Lady Maria. I know she's much easier than the other DLC bosses in this game, but this fight is just so satisfying. With how the parry system works in this game, it's impossible for me to ignore how much fun it is for me to use it on the boss. By now, you should all know how much I love humanoid bosses in these games, and this was pretty much the perfect one in my opinion. Her aggressive moveset paired with her ability to parry makes her attack like a buffed version of Gehrman and Father Gascoigne, two of my favorite bosses from this game. I do wish she had a bit more health or another phase like a similar boss from later in the series, but this is still an awesome fight that I can't get enough of. I do enjoy the Orphan of Cause fight a lot as well for these reasons, but sometimes there's just so much going on that I don't even feel like I'm fighting him. He can jump away so quickly while simultaneously throwing all kinds of attacks at you, which can definitely get a little bit frustrating. I'll admit Ludwig is close for me too. He has the perfect amount of health and is such an awesome boss, but once again, the beast bosses just don't hit the same for me, even though they're pretty much the whole point of the game. Anyway, moving on to Dark Souls 3, you might be surprised to hear that my runner-up is actually Sister Fried. Dark Souls 3 is absolutely top-notch in terms of boss quality, especially in the DLC, and Fried is certainly no exception. I honestly think she's top 3 in the series in terms of difficulty, and that's due to a whopping 3 phases and a little gank action in the middle. People say the third phase is the hardest, but honestly, I have the most trouble with the second because she can randomly just start healing her father whenever she damn well pleases. This is one of those fights where you just have to accept that you'll need to die a ton to learn from it, which is one of my favorite kinds. Fried's moveset is insane, but the fight feels incredibly well balanced. The fact that you can backstab her is pretty much the only thing that gives you a chance, especially in the third phase, and is super satisfying to pull off. For me, it's almost the equivalent of parrying Lady Maria. And even with its difficulty, I still think the second phase is pretty well balanced, since Fried is pretty passive for the most part if you lead the father far enough away. This fight took me the most tries of any boss in the series, and I gotta say they really got me when they pulled out the third phase. Giving the player a Titanite slab after the second phase was probably the best FromSoft troll I've ever seen. I just know they were cracking up when they thought of that. I hope you guys know how many controllers you made people break. But anyway, while Fried is one of my favorite bosses in the series, the best one in the Dark Souls 3 DLC is undeniably the insane finale to the Dark Souls series, Gale. In one of the coolest boss arenas in the series, Gale is so much fun to fight that I actually purposely died to him a few times in my first playthrough because I wanted to keep fighting him that bad. Or at least that's what I told myself to go to sleep at night. Gale is pretty much the perfect boss fight in my opinion, and he's a big part of why I hold Dark Souls 3 so dear to my heart. He has just the right amount of health, and while I wouldn't have been mad at a little bit more, I think they did a good job balancing it. His super aggressive playstyle makes for an awesome fight and is super satisfying to dodge, but he's not too all over the place to the point where he's annoying. The second phase is so cinematic, and most of the time I died was just from being in awe at how amazing it was. His slow-mo crossbow move is probably the most badass thing FromSoft has ever put in a game, and I will absolutely never forgive them for not adding a boss rush mode for this game. Nevertheless, if you haven't played the Dark Souls 3 DLC yet, I genuinely can't recommend it enough, especially if you liked Elden Ring. But moving on, I wanted to mention Sekiro, even though there's only 3 of the DLC bosses, but I think I gotta give this one to the Inner Father. I'm a huge fan of Genichiro and Ishin, but the Owl is just so good, and the inner moveset they added for him is so insane that it felt like a mod. The reason I give this choice to him is because it's the only one that actually felt like a super noticeable difference to me. While the other 2 bosses are great, they only gave him a couple extra attacks to add some additional challenge. I have no idea how many they actually gave to the Inner Father, but his new attacks added a ton of depth to the gameplay alongside his already massive moveset and deadly combos that just make the fight stand out a little bit more to me. Ishin and Genichiro's new attacks feel super overwhelming in the beginning, but actually end up making them much easier once you get them down. The Owl's new attacks don't give any huge punish windows, so it's the only one that feels more difficult even after some practice. He was also one of the most challenging for me on my first playthrough, even without the additional attacks, because his health and posture bar are gigantic, leading to a super lengthy and intense battle. I love that he uses the Mist Raven here, and I wish some of the other bosses had variations of the prosthetic tools that you had to learn to counter, because I think that would have been really cool. But even if we didn't get the Sekiro DLC we were all waiting for, at least we got some cool extra content to add a little bit of challenge for ourselves in the meantime. Also, a lot of people said the outro joke is getting old, but